So Andrew is a part of a crop of exciting young architects from Melbourne, making singular, experimental and critical works of architecture. His office is intentionally small, making it relevant to smaller New Zealand practices, but also to anyone interested in bold, polemic design. He's an architecture that thinks about architecture as much as he does architecture. He has won lots of awards and lectured around the world, but as his website proudly declares, he is not a wanker. So I know you will appreciate his refreshing approach to architecture. Andrew.
Thanks, Aaron. That was great. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. This is awesome. I'm not going to pretend that I have a presentation. I'm not going to pretend that I'm going to make sense. Yeah. Hecklers already. Just one? Bring it on. Oh shit, ugly bastard. Yeah, thanks for having me. This is awesome. I've got too many projects, too many slides. What I'm going to do is just talk until the clock says 0. See how far we get. I'm going to read something to you. A nursing home in Germany built an exact replica of a bus stop in front of the facility. The only difference was the buses never stopped there. It sounds funny, says Old Lines chairman Franz Joseph, but it helps. Our members are 84 years old on average. Their short-term memory hardly works at all, but their long-term memory is still active. They know the green and yellow bus sign and remember that waiting there means that they will go home. The result is that errant patients now wait for their trip home at the bus stop before quickly forgetting they wanted to leave in the first place. We will approach them and say that the bus is running late today and invite them in for a cup of tea. 5 minutes later, they've completely forgotten that they wanted to leave. These aren't designers, these are people that run nursing homes. And to me, this is pretty central to what I think good design is. They had a problem, and rather than working against the problem, they worked with the problem. So they could have turned it into a nursing home that was like a jail, which if you think about a lot of nursing homes, they are like a jail. And instead, they just said, okay, we'll just build a beautiful, that's not the actual one, we'll build a beautiful park bench and put a big sign next to it. And that's pretty important to the way that we practice in my office. We work with problems rather than against them. As Aaron mentioned, I live and work in Melbourne, but I'm on this side of town, which is the Fitzroy, Carlton, Collingwood end. For the few international people, that's Melbourne. Sarah might notice something missing off that map. Sorry. Not for any reason, I just realised when I put it together. Hang on. That's where we are now. But I'm actually from Tassie. And I'm from Launceston in Tasmania, so it's not even Hobart, it's not even interesting. And that is actually a current photograph of Launceston. If you try to take a photograph in Launceston, it goes all sepia. And so when I grew up in Launceston, hey? Right here. So when I was... It's lost my train of thought. When I was young and growing up and playing with Star Wars figures, which I loved, this dude was on the TV all the time, banging on about, well, he said words like stewardship, ethical obligation, forests, rivers, responsibility, all these words that, you know, other politicians don't talk about. They like to tell you what all your rights are. And talking about the Franklin River and the loss of Lake Pedder. And of course, this was the birth of the first Greens political party in the world, and Bob Brown doing his thing. So that was happening in the background. As I grew older, I became a skateboarder, and this was pretty important stuff. Growing in a little regional town, I was treated like a criminal because I wasn't playing footy or cricket. But also, what's really interesting about skateboarding is it's, I think, the first sport that's really grown out of an urban condition rather than a rural one. So what we think as people that use the city, we have all these labels on things, park benches and handrails and things like that. A skater comes along and thinks about it quite creatively. Those labels are removed, and then they reinterpret the way that we use urban space and urban form. And that's the reason you get people assholes coming along and screwing on bits of stainless steel to stop skaters doing creative things. But it's a real questioning. It's sort of this intuitive questioning of the urban form. So I did all 5 years of study in Launceston, and in my final year I stumbled across this quote. You never know whether to read these things or not, but I'm going to read it anyway. Architecture is a discipline where it is impossible to escape values. It's radically value-laden. It is possible that you can become an architect and see it as somewhat autonomous and not as a political act, which is incredibly naive. I try to make students aware of the radical, political, cultural, social nature of our work and how it is impossible to escape those responsibilities. So as a young kid, I've come to the conclusion that architecture is a political act. Of course, what isn't? Everything that we do has political form to it. But what we do in this room is actually pretty violent when you think about it. We are authors of boundary delineation between spaces and authors of the control and the apertures in between those spaces. Other people hold the keys, but we're part of the mechanism that dictates those boundaries. So when I say architecture is a political act, I'm pretty serious about it. Everything is, but what we do is pretty harsh and dangerous. So when I started, I was in a very privileged position to start my practice back then. But when I started, I knew that the work, I didn't have a network in Melbourne, so I knew that the work that I was doing would be the thing that set me off into trajectory. People would say, well, that's the kind of work he does. And knowing that as a young practitioner, it was going to be compromised. So the idea was, and this was impossible, I've never been able to do 50-50, but on one side you've got a paid commission, so you've got all the constraint and the compromise and the conservative nature of procurement of, well, a house, if not all buildings. But then on the other side, doing thought experiments that were completely paid by that, so I didn't start to make profit. One day I might make profit, I don't know, out of a business. But that could be uncompromising, and then myself as client, all of that great fun stuff. So over the years I've ended up with sort of this chart where I've got built projects on one side, and I've got, can I have a pointer? Built projects on one side, pre-prepared. Yes. On one side, and then polemical work on the other. So the word polemic is pretty important to me. You know, it's an attack on something, hopefully a critical one, but it's the idea of being constantly agitating that safe space of, you know, to pay the wages at work, I need to get more projects. You need to be polite about that, but at the same time keeping oneself honest by causing trouble, by producing projects that are, well, you'll see, I'll show you a few. So for a while there I was trying to work out if the built work and these polemical ideas are informing each other, but what I found is quite useful is that they stay irreconcilable. That one's a conservative capitalist-based machine to produce income, and the other one is about disturbing that. And so what we do as practitioners, as you all know, we're trying to build something, but we're constrained within pretty tight parameters, so social, cultural and economic, as well as many other conditions, and that's why quite often, you know, somewhere like Melbourne that does amazing architecture, quite often you see buildings that are simply metal sheds with a really elaborate facade on it because the constraints so often are dictated. Where with a polemical sort of jaunt, you know, I can choose whether I accept that, whether I distort the realities, or whether I erode or simply ignore, or actually turn up the volume is something I like doing on certain ideas. I mentioned sort of the irreconcilable nature of trying to get these, you know, goofy ideas and turn them into something real. This was a pretty big moment for me when I saw Peter Cook building this building, which is just a dodgy knockoff of a really important series of ideas, a series of really important, interesting ideas that he put an envelope around, and then that envelope became a building, which I've never been there, but some people are pretty harsh about that building. So he's taken great challenging ideas, tried to turn into something real, and by doing that, he's not only compromised what he's originally done, but he's actually broken it in a way. Labius Woods deals with this in a much better way, much more interesting way, where if you could imagine that if he decided he was going to start building buildings, he would pretty much break what he's been working at for all these years. This is just a computer render, so don't panic. So you could imagine the constraints with which he is forced to operate in, he almost becomes a wedding cake dresser. But of course he went into film and he's done a lot of really fantastic film design for films that haven't actually gotten off the ground. You should check him out. And Korb also realised the value of doing this, that there were going to be certain projects that he would do where he would actually deliberately keep those on paper. Even if somebody came along and said, hey, we should build that, they weren't actually within that realm because he wanted them to be about the idea and not get broken by the process. But one little idea that I found that does cross that a little bit, and something I was interested in many years ago and I've almost given up on, is this idea of mobility in architecture or adaptability. Another thing that I'll read to you. Mobility is outside bureaucracy because it is usually illegal. It is non-conformist, transgressive, demanding, anti-establishment, incisive, subversive, which on occasion allows us to take more risks and be more intentioned. So for a few years I was trying to work out how to actually make buildings move. Turns out it's really expensive and nobody wants to pay for it. But the great thing about mobile architecture as well, this has been really important to me, thinking about both and either or. How do we make one thing do many things? In the West, we put great big fences around this and isolate it from humans. We create these dead spaces that have nothing to do with people. They're about machines, where in a place where legislation is a bit more relaxed, these become human spaces, people spaces. That bit of architecture is only there for a certain amount of time. There's a transience about it, and the space can become something else, something human. Which brings me to my first project. But very quickly, just some of the projects that I'd been doing, that I've been thinking about in terms of mobility. I got a couple of awards for this guy, which was this dealing with the problem of hot desking in corporate firms and designing a mobile workstation. This one was a bit of fun, which was the idea of a new Australian Parliament. I was thinking about how parliaments are places where there's this illusion of democracy. You want to get in there and shake politicians so often. How do you do that without hurting them? We actually make a building that moves. So if everybody's pretty happy with them, they've got natural light. If you start to get pissed off with them, you get a whole heap of right-wing assholes on one end trying to give them natural light, saying, no, we love your racist policies, while a whole heap of other hippies on this side are trying to shove them into darkness. So you get this constant play until everybody starts going, this is bullshit, we need a spill, as you've probably heard about in Australia, and a coup. So on a grander scale, you have this play of right-wingers and left-wingers, and I hate to be binary, but that's a whole different argument. Zizek reckons we should... I'll shut up about that. Backwards and forwards, and denying or granting a politician, actually doing something physical and something violent to them, instead of pretending that, oh, look, here's this open public building, but we're actually in our plush little offices upstairs. I promised myself I wouldn't get into these too much. This is a really quick one where looking at some really tiny spots, footprints in Melbourne, next to laneways. As you probably know, there's lots of beautiful laneways, bluestone laneways in Melbourne. And this was the idea that we could build some structures that all fit within the planning code, and then when it was built, we could then go and stack them down, just flop them down over the top of the laneway, so cars and things could still go through. But then if council got wind of this and came to have a look, you just really quickly stack them back up. Just go, what? Another one, I started looking at container infrastructure. It's not a new idea, but I started to think about it in terms of public housing and in terms of housing and how we can actually create sort of a level playing field in terms of affordability. So if you actually use that infrastructure and you create a housing block that while you're at work, all of the apartments get rearranged and rejigged. So you own the penthouse and the ground floor suite. You just don't know what you've got at the end of the day. So when you come home, you kind of get this text message and go, where's the house? Oh, damn it, I'm on the south side of the building. But you may have the penthouse for the weekend and you're stoked. Another one looking at emergency shelters using military infrastructure. This was a satire. I've got a whole rant about how we should not be going out and design, like as a profession, we look like a bunch of dickheads. We go out and design emergency shelters whenever a goddamn emergency happens. Just donate to people that actually know what they're doing. Anyway, so this was a real satire about that, which, polemical, it caused problems for me. But, you know, hipsters jumping around going, look, we've saved the world, while the locals going, what the fuck just happened? The Committee for Melbourne approached me. They're looking at these big swathes of dead space where developers are sitting on land, you know, trying to get approvals for things. And I can't remember how long it was. Elizabeth was saying a particular site for Nouvelle was a dead chunk of urban space for so long. The Committee for Melbourne wanted to get the inner city blocks that were sitting and waiting for development and actually turn them into part-time parks. So for 6 months we might actually put down a park, and we make cities more livable by doing that. If we actually want families in cities, then let's put down parkland. So we designed a whole heap of these, you know, roll-out parks for the place, which was cool. They promised they'd build them, but they haven't. Botanical Gardens, little info pod, which is a really fun skirmish. Actually built that. And so that brings me to Nebula. So all of this thinking over 10 years about mobile stuff, and these amazing people called Arts Access Victoria approached me, and they are an arts group that work with artists with disabilities. And this particular user group, called Art Day South, they are artists with intellectual disabilities, and pretty cool people. And they practice their art in Dingley, which is this dodgy little suburb in an old classroom, once a week, and it was not very inspiring. And on very rare occasions where the resources could be put together and you could get enough carers, they were able to, maybe on an annual basis, go into the NGV in the city and actually check out some art. Like so many people that they were excluded, like so many people that don't fit in with the central media-driven norm. They were on the outer, on the periphery of a culture that they really want to be involved in. So the question to us, what Arts Access said to us was, can you create us a mobile structure where we can actually take artists, it's a workspace where we can take them out into the bush and they can get inspired by wildlife, where we can bring them into the city, where they can work there, but we can actually, have everybody safe, and we can also keep an eye on everybody. So when I went and visited them in Dingley, the first half hour of their session, they actually do this sort of group sculpture thing. They're just the carers who are actually artists themselves. So they probably wouldn't want to be calling them artists. Carers. They're all actually artists, and they act like curators while also making sure everybody's healthy and happy. To do this sort of creative stretching exercise for the first half an hour, they just start laying stuff out, and the artists find a spot and start creating sculptures out of them. And it was amazing to watch because everybody started doing their own thing, and over time the areas would start to overlap, and there was just no ego. I was waiting for there to be some sort of fight, like, get away, you're destroying my art. And authorship quite often shifted. So somebody's doing their work and they've just seen somebody else's and wandered over and started tweaking it. And there was one person, Sharon, who I thought, this woman pointing here, who I thought was a carer, she was just going over and abruptly organising people and twisting things and putting stuff over there. And I said to Reen, what's her deal? Why is she so bossy? And I didn't realise she was actually one of the artists, and she'd just taken it upon herself that she was like this in-action, almost performance artist. All I do is go and mess with everybody else's art. So I'd been asked by, I'm not a linear person. I was asked by a car magazine to propose like the Winnebago of the future. This relates to the approach. So mobile homes typically just become longer, bigger buses because you're constrained by proportions laid on the road. So I decided to do an open plan version of a mobile home. So I had this sort of tensile structure that popped out of it. I borrowed that idea, and I also borrowed a lot of the sketches that the artists had been putting together while I was also sketching. What I didn't know was a lot of these, the carers had actually been that actually turns out to be a drawing based on a real thing. So they'd actually been researching and looking themselves. I didn't know that when I received these. But amazing colours, and I started seeing this really sort of this little ribbed kind of form going in a lot of them, and I thought that related back to that previous vehicle I designed, which I called Bob. So they were the sketches from the artists, and so I took this sail looking thing on a few of the drawings, and I thought, wouldn't it be great if you actually fold down one wall and then you have a membrane that comes over that, and then you can control how open that is to the outside by how far that membrane comes down. So if it's raining, you can be working out there in that space, or you can just have some people that are more comfortable inside-outside. It's becoming a theme, isn't it? You can have some people that are really comfortable being inside the vehicle while other people want to chill out, but you're still communicating across those surfaces. And then also performances. They do lots of performances, which is amazing to see. So we sketched these ideas out, and they went and took these and got some funding. When you're dealing with disability, the word inclusion gets thrown around a lot, and myself and Rian and some of the carers were quite interested in the idea that it isn't an inclusive space, that we actually subvert the power paradigm, that these are people that want to be in everyday society, they want to go and hang out with other artists, they want to be able to go to galleries, instead create a space where they control the boundaries and the envelope of that structure. So they can pull the envelope up to engage with the outside, but at the same time, if they want to shut the outside out, they can. And what was amazing about this, the guy that made this was incredible too, Michael. What was great about this, really beautiful to watch, was that when it was in Fed Square for a couple of weeks, there were moments when school children were running around here, actually one of the most stark ones was where a couple of people just wandered up and went to walk into it, and one of the artists stopped and said, what are you doing? And said, I thought I'd come and see what artists with intellectual disabilities are doing. And they're like, we're working right now, dude, can you just bugger off? And then there were some kids that started sort of climbing in here, and this whole thing of inclusion and engagement, it was just great to see the artists going, hang on, this is our threshold, we control this space, you guys need to back off. Which you can imagine, for people who have been shut out so often, they really enjoyed the sport of it. Lots of it's sacrificial. You can see where we've borrowed lots of the colours from the artists. We've left the bottom ones clear, so if it's raining, they can still work. And all of this surface down here is sacrificial, so they can just drill stuff into it, belt the shit out of it, and eventually just take it up and replace it. Fuck, I've already been going for that long. For a while, I was accused of being a sustainable architect, which pisses me off. We're all sustainable architects, aren't we? You get people that market themselves as sustainable architects. But I thought what I'd actually try to do is design a house that is as sustainable as I can make it. You've probably seen this quote. If you get on the internet, so often that's attributed to me, which is good because it sounds clever, but somebody else wrote it. So correct me if I'm wrong, I kind of think that the core of sustainability is reduce, reuse, recycle. Any hecklers? No? You guys are polite. So therefore, surely sustainability must be anti-consumption. And if that's the case, then surely it's anti-capitalist. I love oversimplifying things. And when you test that against somebody like this retail analyst from end of World War II, whose thinking was, our enormously productive economy demands that we make consumption our way of life, that we convert the buying and use of goods into rituals, that we seek our spiritual satisfaction, our ego satisfaction in consumption. We need things consumed, burnt up, worn out, replaced and discarded at an ever-increasing rate. This is when the US became the grand economic power in the world, and quite rightly. That's how World War II ended up. Their industrial machine was going, everybody else's had been destroyed. No? I thought there was a heckler. So therefore, if we make sustainability fit into the current paradigm, then it can't be about reduce, reuse, recycle. We have to make it about consumption, surely. So therefore, it must somehow fit into the capitalist model. So therefore we need sustainability to be a new marketplace and it to be our new product range and for it to be a new form of consumption. And I think that's why when you go onto Google and you type in sustainable house, there are lots of really good examples. There's also a lot of really aestheticised examples, you know, the ones, it's sustainable because it looks sustainable. And then you come across these ones. But how do they get to call themselves a sustainable house? And it's because of all the shit you can buy to put on it now. So design what you want, make it as big as you want, just throw solar panels all at the motherfucker. So hooray, we win. It's the amazing thing of capitalism, is reabsorption. You mentioned Tafuri. He talks about that capitalist thing of reabsorption and spitting back out those things that oppose you, which is very much what has happened to Che Guevara as well. So anti-capitalist, kill him, put him on a T-shirt, absorb that which critiques you. Capitalism's amazing. And then rebrand it, sell it back out into the marketplace. Sneakers, watches, action figures, pretty cool. An energy drink called Revolution, which does not have his name on it, but you know, what he was talking about doesn't matter anymore. Just disconnect that part. Belly button rings, of course. Babushka dolls and toys. So Che and sustainability have become commodity and product, and because of that, what we're really talking about has become trivialised, if not in many ways dislocated. So in terms of our sustainability, I'm not a sustainable architect, but what we do try to do is keep things small. Just want less seems to be a good idea. And to embed sustainability. So we've never specified, I think I can still say we've never specified solar panels. We just say to people, if you want them, the market's built to actually retrofit solar panels on. Don't pay me a percentage based on that. So with the Ilma Grove, it had this great north-facing backyard, it had all of this brick that was clogging up the house, disconnecting it from the backyard. All we decided to do was to rip down all the brickwork that was there and throughout the garden, and then just reassemble it and face it north. So there's 1/4 or 1/5 of the brick came from a brickyard in Coburg, just up the road. But in terms of embodied energy and moving materials, you know, bugger all. And it's just all the usuals. Good passive solar design. You know, getting your eaves right. Some people try to make it sound like rocket science, and it's really not. Just twisting some bricks so we can get some really good planters on the western wall to create a sort of a thermal barrier or a blanket. And just all good green stuff, you know, thermal mass and double glazing and recycled cork and low VOC materials. Very limited budget, so we weren't going to get thermal mass upstairs, but I thought I'd put down black carpet and see what that did, and it actually works pretty well, soaking up the sun. I'm going to zoom through that. Oh, I love messing with councils. Overlooking, everybody in Victoria is a pervert. That's why you're not allowed to ever look in anybody's backyard. Like the legislation, you're not allowed to know who your neighbours are. So we put a thermal blanket on the roof for increased insulation, which was AstroTurf. So the owners could get up and look across to the Dandenongs and back to the city. Veda was pretty important. It was a project that really sort of propelled us along a bit, and I got to test out a few ideas on sitting the new extension at the back, eating up the backyard and inserting the yard into the middle of the house and giving a bit of breathing space between the new and the old. These are things that have now occurred over and over in our work. And scarring the old instead of tarting it up. So slicing a hole in it, leaving it pretty raw, which is the same as we did in Ilma House as well. Styx Valley Protest Shelter. This was just in Venice. That's the only reason I threw it in. It was part of the Australian exhibition. So this was a polemic where the Guns was going through Styx Valley, where they've got the tallest flowering gums in the world, 80 to 90 metres tall, and just ripping the hell out of it. So a road was going through the Styx Valley. On one side it looked like that, and on the other side it looked like that, just napalmed. And they just went in there for the gums. So all of the other 400 or 500-year-old wilderness was just napalmed afterwards. And of course that pissed a lot of people off. And the Wilderness Society went and put up what they called the Global Research Station, which is some bits of yellow plywood. When winter set in, they took it down, and I went and visited them, and we talked about proposing an idea, telling the world that we were going to put up a permanent structure which grabbed onto 3 different trees. And we had no, I loved them to build it, but we actually had no intention. We weren't going to spend $150,000 on putting that there. Instead, it was through architecture, through paper architecture, this propaganda. And this actually got a fair bit of press, especially in Spain. In Spain, they love this thing. Anyway, I thought I'd quickly throw it in there. Some very clever people did some amazing renders of it that look very real, and a fly-through. Hill House. I'm going quickly, I'm sorry. I'm just going to... Some people say I talk too quickly. I'd just rather get through lots of projects. I get bored easily. In Australia, since 2009, we've had the biggest houses in the world. So America lost that mantle in 2009. And alarmingly, and you can see that with government, everything becomes privatised. And that comes from sort of an idea of home as well. We have pools and tennis courts and things. No longer do Australians want to invest in public infrastructure of that nature, community infrastructure. They want to privatise it all. One of the big problems is this notion of what is home to Australians, and it is a freestanding structure in the middle of a paddock, sort of this colonial, rural, maybe this is similar to here, I don't know. Or it's this, great place in the bush. And that translates to this, where you have really big structures on a 1/4 acre block that are 2 metres apart, not in the bush, they're on rural land that farmers have sold up, divided up. And in Melbourne, there's no topography to constrain the joint. It's not like Sydney, it's not like New York, where you've got boundaries that cause density. So people keep selling farms and they keep on spreading. And government talks about restraining and then lets it go. So, and of course, black roof tiles are the trend. Even though urban heat sinking models shows that we should have white roofs. So this is in sort of a northwestern suburb. And Hill House isn't somewhat inner city suburb. Different socio-economic, but not that different. These are big houses for people who have money out in the burbs. So Alistair and Lisa, that's not them, but they had 3 kids, and they own this really weird little block that faces north up the page. They own this little, what they call the Battle Axe. They bought this little laneway that goes out to this street, and then there's a park in the middle with only 2 entries into this park. So quite often it's only the neighbours around here that use it. And they love the community there. It was really, they were a firm part of that community, but they had the smallest block with one of the biggest families. So they were feeling that pressure of, as a lot of clients do when they come to us, they were saying, do we go to the suburbs now? Is that what you do? You get to a certain size and then you can march out and get a backyard and all of that stuff. Can we do something else? Oh, there's those connections. So the front of the house facing north, beautiful front yard. And then at the back, this 90s extension, 2 stories. So there's the Battle Axe and there's the park. And this had just denied any decent sunlight coming into the backyard since it was built, that 2-story lump. So they were saying, can we replace that? Because it's shit, and I don't know what you're going to do because you're just going to replace it with 2 stories of program for us anyway. This may not make sense, but so park, laneway, existing house, do you just add on to the back? Because that's what an extension is, you add on the back. But we started saying, well, let's add on to the rear boundary where we're loading up the southern boundary so we can create a north-facing facade, but also we make direct connections to the park and out to the laneway and maybe create a new front door so you don't have to walk past those first bedrooms. Which, in Melbourne, in terrace houses, you go in and I don't care who you are, everybody just looks to the left to look into people's bedrooms before they go out into the living space, because we're all perverts. So we got a footprint, and great, very clever, let's face north. And so I started designing a cool modernist box, because that's what we do. But then I started to think, if this is the first time that they're having any, for 10 years, any meaningful sunlight coming into a living space, maybe we need to do more with this. So I started thinking about, well, the Spanish Steps perhaps would be great to activate that. So instead of just having a boundary of, here is the outdoor space, there's building, to actually get that outdoor space to envelop. And then, should it be a Seurat painting? And we ended up, it's funny when we do these lectures, everything seems linear and easy. And of course, the nightmares you go through to get to these points. And we ended up with that. And then the clients are two solicitors. And I thought I'd give it a crack. They won't go for it. And I presented it to them. And straight away hitting panic stations because they absolutely blanked me. And I prepare a lot of diagrams to explain all the reasons why this thing should exist, and it absolutely blanks me. And I thought, oh, here comes a redesign. Just wasted so much time. And then Alistair's realised, and he's gone, oh shit, sorry, we're being lawyers. Could you just, poker face. Do we like it? Yeah, we like it. And then suddenly they loved it. So most of our clients are lawyers, but they live on this side of the Yarra River. On our side of the Yarra River, then the politics changes on the other side of the Yarra River. So what we did as well as all architects want to build a cantilever. So our excuse was, and it's kind of legitimate, that's actually the passive solar line. So where we put this big opening, that's the line which lets in the most sunlight in winter, but cuts out all sunlight to hit that glass in summer. And also, nobody comes to us with a short-term plan. They've all got a 30-year plan. So the young kids, people want to know, if we're staying in a smaller block, where do we put them? So the great thing about this is the original house, the kids can slowly take over as they become adults, and they'll have their own entry. And then the new part of the house that connects to the park and the battle axe, the parents will be able to have their own spot and then their own entry. And the other thing that I like, which nobody else seems to care about, but I like it, is the fact that the most public face of all buildings now is from Google Earth. It's no longer from the street. And the fact that we've actually tidied this up. There's a lot more greenery in our Google Earth presence. It looks pretty, but there's so much more going. If you start a lecture and you say, cool, we did a black box on a hill, it's no wonder people think architects are wankers. Because, I would never have come at the clients with this. I think you should do a black box and a green hill. There's a lot of reasons why this thing should exist the way that it does. In Victoria, planning code means you're not allowed to have a continuous wall along a boundary. So if we were to load up the back boundary, that means we needed to go a corridor through there, and they weren't up for Sheila and John's walking outside. So we had to build a corridor. So we love confusing building surveyors. So the building surveyor says, you can't have a wall along there. And I said, okay, can we have a fence? Yep. How high can we have the fence? 2 metres. All right. Can we have a 2 metre high fence that's a metre wide? He's like, well, why do you want a metre wide fence? I said, are we allowed to do that? Yes. Okay, it's a corridor then. So we cut down the floor so it's slightly underground, and then you walk along through the fence, and then you come around to the dining area, and then we've used that level change to pinch back some space. So you've got chairs on one side, but you actually sit on the floor on the other side. So we've actually got made some cushions now. So you actually sit on the floor there. So we're using that problem to our advantage. Looking back into the central garden. So standing in the kitchen. So the kitchen's the real hub. It's that's looking down to the street and the parks behind us. And also, we love pinching neighbours' plants. So here we see the canopy of the plants, but you don't see the neighbours' buildings. You kind of feel like your place is much bigger than it really is. And then that's the park out there. And Alistair thought it was really cute at first, but now he's absolutely sick of having kids in his house that he doesn't know. It's like, who are you? What's your name? Where do you live? Get out of my fridge. So the slope, a lot of questions I get, the slope of the grass is 46-ish degrees. So with the building surveyor, we said, if we put a 46-degree metal roof there with a gutter at the bottom, would you care? So, no, that's a roof. Okay, well, this is a roof. And so we didn't end up with balustrades. All right. and it's fun. And we talk a lot in the office about making playful space that's not childish. We're not actually interested in making spaces for kids. We're actually making spaces for people to have fun in. The fact that kids let go of all of their, baggage easier than adults is not our problem. House. Last year we got a high commendation for this in the World Architecture Festival, which was cool. This is an extension to 2 Victorian terraces in Richmond that are just mirrored plans. Damien had owned number 34 for 10 years. There's a car park here, quite a large car park, and his dad came along and bought 32 when it went onto the market, and then they decided to renovate and extend both, and they just said, just treat it like a development. We just want a mirrored plan on here to save money. Thinking again, we all know, we see Fujimoto's work and you look at Japanese work and you just think, God damn, where are your handrails? Like, how do you get away with this stuff? Our legislation's so much more hardcore. So I've always, like all of us, just seen the pornography that comes from Japan and thought, how do we get away with that? But I've also thought that it was a typology that would be so useful, where Australians go out to the burbs into these big houses with this excuse of, I want my kids to grow up with a big backyard, and they don't have one, they've just got a big house. I've always thought, if we're going to do the whole quarter-acre block thing, what if we did it on a really small footprint, in a really tall house, and it had a lot more outdoor space? So what happens if we get the quarter-acre block and we borrow from a dense typology like Tokyo, and we transplant that in? So from where I live, not my house, but near where I lived as a kid in Tassie, take this horizontal understanding of what a home is that Australians have. Space is stacked that way, not stacked that way. And what if you then go and cut and paste and plonk that on the site? What if you just rotate it around, and instead of getting this one perspective on the landscape, you get all these shifting perspectives on the landscape and you get a whole heap more outdoor space? Now, this is in Richmond. This isn't that place. But they're the ideas that I was trying to test out in House. So what we did is we just tidied up the main house, and then we cut off all the old wet areas and the junk. So then you extend. Just bang something on the back of it and extend. What we decided to do was avoid that. We tried to maximise the backyard. That's, again, the same thing we tried to do in Hill House, was to make the outdoor space the aggressor rather than the victim. So when you're working in a dense area, you're building buildings closer to green spaces and you're kind of apologising to the whole time. This is the idea of how small can we make the building and how big can we make the outdoor space. So we went as high as we could go under the planning legislation, and then we just teased them apart so they could have their own personalities. And because they're family as well, we made it so you could slide the fence away. I actually wanted to slide away the entire wall through there, so the kitchens and dinings could all be shared. I thought it was rad, but they said, look, we're a family, but we're not that close. So anyway, I talked them into sharing the backyard. Spent all the money downstairs where people spend their daylight hours, and then just kept it relatively vanilla upstairs, and then treated this void space as almost like an outdoor space, and it's where all the vertical circulation happens. All the good green stuff, high performance insulation, through breezes, that stuff. I can't pretend I haven't patented a bit, but all of these windows that seem random on the outside actually serve functions internally. So some are at the head height of a shower, so you can get a little view out, and some are on the study table, and some are on the study floor, so that internally it's not just this it's a pattern facade outside, but it actually serves a function internally. I also, you know how you build a building and then you find all these things, and you kind of want to take ownership of it, like, I was being very contextual, it's got a similar scale to all of these prominent... No, I didn't think of that, but I quite like that it's having a really good chat with these places around it. Now, brave clients, they just listen and don't panic. Let's actually face a car park. Like, instead of all the other developments that happened around here have just built concrete walls to it, and they'd surrendered it to urban as an urban dead space, as a black hole. And I was saying to them, you don't know what's going to happen to this car park in the future. This is the city of Yarra. It's a really dense area. It might become a park one day. Let's actually engage with it, not be one of the last people to condemn it to a concrete death. So their bedroom's up there, looks over the top, and actually not using concrete, using a timber, and saying, actually trusting Melburnians, saying, bring it at us. If you've got to be dickheads, be dickheads, but we trust you. So in around Fitzroy and Richmond, there's great graffiti and murals. We were hoping one of those would emerge, but because there's also a shitload of tagging, what we thought is we'd be preemptive, and we'd just paint a section. Apologies for the lights and all that, looks much better here. Paint this section black so that if somebody does come along and tags it, then Damien can just come out with a bit of black paint and just brush over it. And if somebody's a real dickhead and goes and tags up here, we've made him a cloud stencil, so he can go and plonk it up there and spray over the top of it. So there's not one there yet, but we're assuming over time it'll get cloudier and cloudier up there. Don't get any ideas. Where is it in Richmond? I'll be the first arsehole. And Damien and Rachel got on board with this. They went and bought this sort of house-shaped light, which is pretty cool. And where there was a stuff-up, work with the problem rather than against it. Where we had a problem, the builder had done something weird over here with the steel, and we're architects, we like straight lines, so we had this weird kink. So instead of throwing a tantrum, and again, sorry about the light, there's actually sort of this graphic of a house that's painted on before it becomes just raw steel. We started using that house profile to fix little problems, or even just turn up the volume on them, so take ownership of a problem rather than going, nobody look there. But we've hidden that throughout the house. We think they've found them all now. Like even the bike hoop we actually designed so it's a little house shape. And there's the fence slid away. And the mirrored kitchens, so kitchen, barbecue, same on that side. We held our egos and let the original house, we just tidied it up. So it could be an original house. We just carved a couple of holes through and left that as raw steel so you could really see what we'd done to the original house. And then my favourite part of this building is just that the circulation happens through this interstitial space. And again, one of the things you discover rather than actually thinking about when you're designing it is walking up here and running your hand along the old brick and then touching the cedar on the other side. There's something really magical about that dance. And where we've had to cross it using perforated metal so that you can, from one level, talk down to the other level, but also it just does feel like you're bridging a gap. I hate it. You see all these extensions and just it's like it's either a cancerous growth or some parasite that's just attacked the thing. So that's house. Tower house. We just got photos of this 2 days before I came over. So this is the first time anybody's seen these photos. Really sophisticated clients, and we worked, and they wanted the long-term home, really into the arts and into thinking a lot about their home, which is great. They didn't just talk to us about bathrooms and kitchens, they talked to us about life, the universe and everything, which can be daunting, but it was pretty fun. And after great efforts, we came out with this sketch. The story goes that our second or third meeting, we're sitting down finally nutting out how they wanted the thing to lay out, and to entertain the boys, they've got twin boys, there were 8 at the time, gave them pads and pencils and just said, go sit over there and draw, all right, and just leave the adults to work. And after an hour and a half, we'd gone, hooray, we'll put a study there, and the original house we'll put the boys in and some living spaces, then we'll load everything up on the southern boundary and put the parents at the end. And all right, see you guys. And the boys came over and they gave me 2 drawings and said, there you go. Arseholes. And in the context, it was really small, sort of fragile post-war context. What we really didn't want to do, there's a fair amount of program to fit in. We didn't want to do the big modernist box. And we're talking a lot about community. Sophie, the client, she loves the word community. She's very generous that way. And I think that's got to do with sort of her interaction with the arts as well, being a patron of the arts. And so we started talking about it, rather than a house, let's design a village. And I was also very acutely aware of Google Earth and what I mentioned before, the most public face is not how we present to the street. It's anybody, as soon as they find out where an architect's built their houses, can get on and have a look. So which is similar to the Utzon thinking about the Opera House, the fifth facade. It'll be seen from the bridge looking down at. Well, that's what we've all copped now. We can't hide air conditioners on the roof. And also along with that village idea that we'll make it look really small from the outside, but we'll make it really big on the inside. Did I say TARDIS? Oh, village, yeah. So it's, yeah, like the TARDIS. So we end up with that illustration. So the garden was really important to Phil and Sophie as well. He works in the parks, so garden and the interaction between the two is very important. But then internally it feels much bigger. And from the start, I always like to sort of put my foot down on the vision for the garden, so you don't just get somebody else coming in and going, well, we should do this. And I was just saying, let's not do hard things. Let's make sure that the landscape sort of bleeds out of it. So there it is. And you've got number 7 on this side. Nobody knows why this is. That's number 7. That's number 3. There is no number 5 in this street. Don't know why. So anyway, we've gone and added number 5, which is the boys' study. And again, just adding little details, there's like that's the actual elevation of the design. We've cut that into a couple of places. The original house, the study, and then all of the landscape beyond. That's inside the original house, looking from the extension into the original house. And then that's coming around original house, dining room, kitchen, master bedroom, and Sophie's studio. And so this tower here, this is the boys' study. So twin boys working away, and what we did was we actually created just a 2-story bookshelf on one side. Sophie's got a crazy amount of books. She's told me since moving in that we haven't filled the quota. She's boxes of books laying around. So the boys, again, long-term home. This was a place where the boys are going to go in and they're going to think and they're going to read. So workspace down the bottom, but then you actually basically climb the bookshelves and then you get out and hang out up in this net where then you can either look down into the yard and to Mum's studio on that side, or there's another window on this side where you can look out into the street. And some really wonderful older trees around the area, so that little nest up there you can see out into that borrowed landscape. And it's really important for me to, whatever story we tell on the outside, we tell on the inside. So just went to great pains to make sure that where we had these envelopes, we actually really did separate them, but they also serve a function. So in the kitchen, where those two buildings meet, that's where there's a skylight straight over the top of the kitchen bench. And also what happens outside also happens inside. So the bedroom door to Sophie and Phil's spot has the shingles on it because that whole form is running down. And this is Phil's spot. So Sophie gets this gorgeous library, the boys get this kick-ass study, and Phil has some astroturf on top of the kitchen where he just goes and plonks himself, and there's a banana lounge up there. And that's Sophie's study. Her bathtub's on that side as well, so you can wander around and just have a bath in this central little courtyard that she's got. And she was saying, where do people sit if they come and visit me in my library? So we've actually got this little cushioned area where you flip up the floor and a cushion is under there. Oh, and it's got 2 street frontages. So Perry Street is almost like a country road at the back of it. So it was really important for Sophie that they actually have it so that people can wander through, that they can open up the fences. Tight community, they want to be able to have people over and even just grab things out of the veggie patch and wander on. I'm getting bored of my own voice, so I might wrap it up. See these numbers here? I should have mentioned those earlier. You know when somebody's giving a lecture and you're just kind of like, okay, it was all good, but I'm a bit sick of it now. How many are there to go? And you think it must only be one more. So then they present it, and it's like, and here's another project. You know, oh, fuck, how long is this going to go? I actually I've got 3 left. So I started with 10. I should have told you earlier. It's like, seriously, he's got 6 left? God damn it. I'm going to wrap it up though. Zero waste table. Missed out on the Moore Street. Oh no, I can't wrap it up. I've got to show Sheila and John this. Sorry, we just finished another house recently. It's got one on it. You're almost there, people. Stick with me. The clients wanted to go on theme, wanted it ridiculously inside out. So what we did here was the same thing again. We east-west block. We loaded up the southern boundary, and Derek wanted a studio at the back, and then we were extending the little weatherboard joint at the front. What I always find interesting about you drive through the suburbs and it's so easy for wanky architects to hate the suburbs, but isn't it beautiful when it's under construction? You've got these beautiful frames hanging there, and the problem, they're just so, you just imagine so many wonderful things, and then some dickhead goes and clads it in something awful. And we've explored that before in a house where I've tried to sort of turn the house inside out so you hang the frame on the outside, which is kind of like in the movie The Fly, when they transport the zombie, the monkey. Anybody seen The Fly? They try to teleport him and he comes in inside out, so all his ribs are poking it. Anyway. And a tight budget again, so we thought we'd just take, the idea was to get a shed and then just spend all the money internally on it, and then just to strip away parts of the metal so that we're just left with a frame and a garden. So it was ridiculously inside out. So we end up with the original house, so the original house there, 4 rooms, little sitting space and kitchen and dining, and then framework sitting in a garden and Derek's studio at the back. And it's actually a pretty, everything's getting gentrified, but it was till recently quite a working class area. They don't have kids, so the actual master bedroom is just one whole wall that connects the rest of the house, and if they have guests over they can slide it, but get up in the morning, one of them can make coffee while actually communicating from the bed to the kitchen area. And so you can see there where we've started to peel off. We've got this basic shed steel structure, and we've started to peel off some of the metal cladding. Little pond through there. It's been on a couple of blog sites on the web, and some of the comments, I love comments on the web. Some people are just haters going to hate, but some people don't they don't notice things like the stacked bits there, so they read the text about ridiculously inside out and they're just saying you're so irresponsible, you can't have a kitchen and dining area that don't have walls around it. So there's the dining area, and there's Ray. Sheila taught Ray in Ireland, and he's now working for me as a model. There he is again. He hates this photo because his feet are really dirty in that photo. So we keep sending him off to magazines hoping they'll print that one. So this is looking from Derek's studio back down to the dining area. And there's Derek chilling out in his music studio. So he works at home doing music and sound gear. In both spaces there's little areas where, again, to blur the line between inside and out, we've actually cut chunks of the floor out and flipped them outside to be deck. And it's almost like that's excavated and revealed turf and inside. And so that's looking back at the main house. Last one. And it's the suburb eating robot. And I only put this in because people don't understand why I've got this thing on everything. Go to our website, and we also sell T-shirts with this little guy on it, and skateboards and stuff like that. But he's a character that I designed 2008 for a conference where they asked me, what is the future of the Australian suburb? And I said, well, it's this. That's the future of the Australian suburb. But before we get there, it's going to look a lot like this. And it's all of their fault. Because Melbourne's interesting, because Melbourne was the second city in the world to have a localised train network after London. So not an intercity one, but just a localised train network. So development happened along the train lines, and you had all of these sort of rural areas coming in, all these green areas coming in. And of course the car comes along and just says, I don't care, I'm just going to fill all this in with housing. So you just end up with this big blob. Now with peak oil approaching, and we run out of oil, fuel, medicines, plastics, all of that going on, we won't have the luxury of spreading out so thin. So in Australia, we're going to have to get used to living in a much more dense fashion. So I started imagining these walled cities that would somehow keep the trains going, and we'd end up with these walled cities running around the train lines. But the question is, how does the landscape become this from suburbia? And it's because of the suburb eating robot, who's this automatic robot who wanders through the abandoned suburbs. Everybody's migrated into the cities, into density with their scarce resources. And to collect this much needed resources, these robots go through and farm what we've left behind. And as they go, they leave natural flora and fauna in their wake. But how do they do that? Well, they've got 6 legs. The first 2 legs come down and they just smash into the suburbs and just basically mulch everything and suck it up through all these cogs. You can tell I'm an engineer, through cogs. And then recycle it into, what have I got? Glass, plastic, something else, metal. And then they fire these rockets out that go all the way back to the city. And they drop these resources. People are like, oh, fantastic, get these plastics and turn them into fuel. Then the next 2 legs come along and they have a whole heap of fully formed native flora. So where the first foot's come up and left dirt, the next one comes down, bonk, just plants flora, and you've got forest instantaneously. Then the 5th leg comes along, and in carbonite freeze, anybody know the reference? Empire Strikes Back, Han Solo? In carbonite freeze, don't worry about it, there are koalas and kangaroos and all this gear, and the 5th foot comes down, plonks it on there, and immediately they're thawed out, and you've got indigenous forest and wildlife back. But the 6th leg, the question is, cool, you got this thing that's going to save humanity. What the hell fuels it if we've run out of petrol? But luckily Australians have been storing the fuel that we need the whole way along. Because Australians are one of the most obese populations in the world. And human fat is really rich fuel. So what happens is, unfortunately, obese Australians haven't been able to make the migration. They haven't been able to get all the way to the city with everybody else. But CBO 6th leg comes along and... Should I stop? Comes along and picks them up, applies liposuction, which is used as fuel, and then shoots them back out nice and thin. And it constructs a bicycle out of all the other waste that it's created, drops the bicycle there, and then they ride back to the city. That's CBO 8, and I'm done.